Welcome, everybody. Once again, this is Chris Barrows. I am here, and if you are watching this, there's a very good chance that you are part of my UNL or William Patterson course, either graduate or undergraduate. There's also a chance you're watching this live. Again, with all of these that I've done, I felt it's very important to put it out there. One as an example, because I think as a class that there needs to be an understanding that there's a lot of great opportunities to use live streaming and social media. But secondly, quite frankly, I've got some very smart people that I'm talking to. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Nikki Sunstrum. And Nikki, could you tell everybody, I know you've had a career in social media and marketing and so many different things, but you haven't always been in higher ed. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your career and your background and where you are today.
Absolutely. So currently, I am the Director of Social Media and Public Engagement at the University of Michigan. That is a role that I have held for the past 6.5 years. Prior to that, I actually created and established the digital footprint for the state of Michigan. So my background was first in political science, and then I sort of went back to grad school, thought I was going to teach, ended up thinking that might not sustain my family because I have 6 children, as many people know, and then returned to state government and found this sort of niche and this emerging tool called social media, and started to really think strategically about how to leverage it to engage constituents, to build more transparency in government, and to provide more robust resources. And based off that, I ended up in Ann Arbor, where I currently reside.
So you're in at kind of the start of social media. I think it's always interesting whenever I talk to someone who's was there at the beginning, so to speak, which it was very different. What do you
Mhm.
think is the biggest evolution you've seen since you started working versus now in social media from the marketing side of things?
Ooh, from the marketing side of things, it's interesting because if you wouldn't have put that caveat on the end, I would have said tone. Tone is by far, I think, the thing that has evolved the most, and sometimes that also does apply to marketing. We've moved a little bit away from the phenomenon of what everyone called, the Wendy's voice or Wendy's approach a couple of years ago. But in general, I think the wide scale adaptation or adoption of social is far different than when I got into this game back in '08. It's also really changed not only the way in which we have to present ourselves, but the demands of the expectations on both consumer and brand. Marketing went from being a tool that leveraged social to get more word out. And now they're sort of turned on their head into the fact that if you don't automatically respond or automatically have that sort of attention for the consumer, who is now the one getting the word out, you're potentially behind the eight ball and doing damage control.
It's interesting that you say that. I'm even thinking back to the other day when for example, I was on Twitter and I mentioned that my Bose headphones, the left earbud stopped working,
Yeah.
right? And it was a day later that they got back to me. In the
Mhm.
course of that 24 hours, I had actually gone out and bought new earbuds from Google. And that's that. But so the time really, you don't think about it.
Right.
Sometimes when you're not in the marketing side of it, you're a marketer, but you're doing your own personal thing. But it's true, the response time, it's incredible what's expected. When you think about it, though, you mentioned tone. Let's talk about tone. I think everyone feels like there's this drastic change in tone when you talk to them in social today. It's a very hyper space where people are saying a lot of things. They're very opinionated. Do you think there's been a big change in the tone from when we first started versus where we are now?
Yeah, I think there's been an enormous shift. I think every 4 years, we're now starting to see an enormous shift. Um, there's so many societal issues that now come to light through social. And, if you think all the way back to the origin of Twitter, that really was the first sort of like antithesis for the popularity of the program. People were navigating to the platform to communicate on societal issues internationally, and then here, in the US, and they continue to kind of bring to light a variety of things that they really are kind of revealing to a larger audience, right? That was the appeal for social for me in the beginning, was that you could instantaneously reach a global audience for free. Anyone could do that. It's also a double-edged sword, right? We no longer have sort of any sort of delineation between who gets to automatically influence a global population. And sometimes that's great, and sometimes it's really quite awful. After the last election in 2016, I was at Michigan, and sort of seeing the evolution of tone at that point. My team and I partnered with our School of Information and our Center for Social Media Responsibility on campus, which was popped up in that same sort of time frame, because they noticed that researchers from a faculty perspective also could potentially add value in this space by helping platforms themselves really learn more about their communities. And so we created a social integrity website. It's called UMich, or socialintegrity.umich.edu. And it was really designed to educate people on the power of social media and help them understand what they were putting out into the space and how permanent it would be, or that, once you take that Snapchat and you send it off, it no longer belongs to you and you really have very little control over what it does. We've seen that magnify and multiply over the course of the last 4 years. People really have either an enormous amount of awareness about the impact and influence of the content that they share, or they have a complete and total disregard, and really think that there are very little consequences. And that's tremendously concerning.
Yeah, and let's think about this from a strategy perspective, because that's really the big reason I wanted to talk to you. How do you approach one social strategy from the top level? What's the first step when you're opening up an account, right? When we're thinking about strategy, what are we actually looking to do? What's your process for breaking out the strategy? In particular, let's start with this for a new account. New account that's got to go out, that obviously has to have a purpose. Where does it start? And because I think it's important, because this happens all the time, does the account come first or does the strategy come first?
Oh, the strategy absolutely comes first. The University of Michigan has actually been under a new account freeze since 2018, as we continuously try to implement and push strategy first in a lot of the social properties that we had existing, but also as the platforms continue to evolve, right? It doesn't make sense necessarily much anymore to pop up a brand new account if you can potentially leverage an existing account that has an established and engaged audience. So if somebody comes to me, or somebody is necessitating or thinking that they need a property, the first question is always why. For me, truly, why do you think you need an account? And they often have a really good answer for why they think they need an account. But the question that follows that is, who is your account for? And very, very frequently, the account is for internal people and not for external people. They want to reach an audience, but they have absolutely no idea how to do it. They don't know which platform their audience is on. They don't know the types of content they need to create. They don't have the resources available to them to know the difference between a GIF and a meme and a video and a photo. And they don't have the ability to really think about how you align the content that you do on a daily basis, or that you design in an elongated narrative, to align with the goals and objectives of their organization, or understand how the metrics that come along with those should align with whatever your communication strategy is for the month or the year or the quarter. So I start with the why, and then I lead to the who, and then we really start to button down and get into, if those boxes are checked, it's like, okay, let's do a test run, right? Let's start to think about all those resources and expectations and guidelines, and what our accomplishments and achievements are going to be in order to make this community really thrive. And then perhaps we hit the ground running. But without that foundation, popping up new accounts these days is a fruitless effort.
Yeah, and it's interesting if you were to take over a new account. I also always recommend like what are we doing in reverse and coming in
Mhm.
and automatically as I've come in into any new job, I audit it. I see what's working,
Yeah.
what's not working, what accounts need to exist, why does this account exist,
Yeah.
and it's that same process. But sometimes it's from has to be from reverse when you're coming new into the role.
Mhm.
If you're looking at forming strategy now, not just for the account, but then we get into the content strategy.
Mhm.
Um, One, the question that has come up throughout all my courses is how do I stay up to date on all of these things and what and not just how, but what do I need to do to actually really maintain this knowledge? It's almost comparable as I joke to my dad's a pharmacist. He has to stay up to date on
Yeah.
the medicines, right? Well, we've got to stay up to date. How do you do that? And then do you think you need to know everything happening with every network at every given time as a social media manager or a strategist?
Well, it's funny because I think you have to know a little bit or at least enough to be dangerous across every platform. And that's because it helps you combat those questions like, why don't we have a TikTok? Which, is the one that we've all been getting for a few years now. And you have to be able to at least address those issues, right? But as far as determining, how to get something really up and running, I think you have to really be an active listener or participant in the platform. You don't have to necessarily be an influencer, but you at least have to be aware of the tips, tricks, tools, and sort of inner workings of the network. So it's going to be really hard in order to create engaging content that will resonate with your community members. I think one of the things that's been a really unique opportunity during the pandemic as well is that we have this sort of unprecedented, to use an overused term currently, we have an unprecedented opportunity to look back and reflect on where we're at and why we're there and really evaluate the value that we're bringing or perhaps that we're not. There is no shortage of things currently taxing on the mental health of society or individual social media managers or directors of social and communications like myself. And so, we should absolutely be prioritizing not only our time and our effort, but the value that we bring to our stakeholders and our constituencies. They have these elevated expectations. They have a heightened sense of awareness. They're all at home, online, dialed in every single day. And there's really very little appetite for fluff. And so, if you are in that role right now, you should be really thinking strategically and not just creatively.
So that's actually, I think, a great point. And obviously, you've been in this game a long time. Where is that fine line of just enough creative, just enough strategy? And then there's no perfect answer, I know, because really it's going to depend on the project. But how do you personally try to process, when it comes down to it, finding that level of creativity that supports the strategy and realize that, hey, this isn't fluff. Like this might look cool, but this is
Mhm.
also really good and aligns perfectly with what we need to accomplish as a brand or as an organization.
Yeah, the thing here that I always like to reiterate with people is to stay in your swim lane. We used to have, and I know in years past, like I've done presentations about, the hiccups that brands have had in social, and it almost always occurs when you sort of exit your swim lane and start to offer commentary or create content that doesn't have a direct correlation back to your brand or your resources or the mission and vision of your institution. And so I think that's one of the ways to make sure that you do so appropriately. I think some of the other things that you really have to do is think creatively, but not always act creatively. Um, we've been accused, I know, particularly in higher ed, of trying to market COVID and returns to campus, which is absolutely asinine. We truly are looking for creative ways to strategically teach and inform our constituencies and our stakeholders of public health informed information or resources and guides and health and safety information. That requires really great photography. It requires a student video. It requires me to have a live town hall conversation. All of those things are both creative and ways in which to try to get people to engage, but they are absolutely, at the end of the day, strategic and there for the health and safety of our community. Social media blends those worlds so seamlessly that sometimes it is potentially problematic, right? Whether or not we are communicating on behalf of decisions that we didn't make is always called into question. But, depending on where you sit in an institution, social media is the front door to any organization. And that makes anybody that is managing it or monitoring it or designing content for it on a daily basis somebody that should absolutely have a seat at a decision-making table, because they can bring forth what your people are actually saying and what they actually want, and then help you mold and build those bridges between expectation and reality.
You make a tremendous point in having the seat at the table. And in many cases, we have social media managers who are teams of one. I know you've been there, and we know personally between you and I, many people, myself included, where we sit as a team of one. And obviously you're not in this current time, but I know you've been there.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to it, how do you think you should approach strategy as a potential team of one? Because I think a lot of the students who are going to be listening to this, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening, there's a good chance they will be a team of one at some point, or even in many of the students' cases, there may actually be assumed that they understand social because they're coming from college with a degree, which is unfortunately 10 years later still the case. I do not know why people think that. But what's your advice regarding teams of one and building strategy? Because from a time management perspective, there's a lot they have to do.
Yes. My favorite analogy that I used over a decade ago when I was launching social media was, would you let the student intern or the summer intern answer the public affairs calls, right? The media calls. And everybody always thought that was crazy. And yet, as you know, it is still happening, right? We are still putting digital natives, because they're digital natives, in charge of accounts with hundreds of thousands of people, and they may not really have that overarching strategic communication sense yet. So, that's my 2 cents on that note. But ask me your other question again, because I soapbox there for a minute.
I think really the question is, what do you recommend from the perspective of advice of how do you be strategic? Well, you're still the one managing the content, realistically creating the images, probably using a tool like Canva or Adobe Spark. I mean, the reality is you wear a lot of hats, and let me be really clear, because obviously you've worked with government politics and a variety of areas, and now you're in higher ed. But the reality of this is teams of one are not limited to an industry. Teams of one are a thing across all industries. And so let's just get that on the table, because I think many people act as if teams of one are not a thing. In the industry, they're not.
That's right. Okay. I'm glad you brought me back home. Thank you for that.
But go ahead. I get hit. So go into that. The team of one for me.
Team of one. Well, I was a team of one for years, right? When I came to U of M and I had one other person on my team, I was delighted. I had no idea what to do with myself. And over the course of the last 6.5 years, I have built that out to be a fully functioning team of 10. And on a daily basis, I still feel like I could use twice as many people. But that's because of the expectations that we've set and the expectations of the platforms and the growth of our communities and the breadth of the tools that we're currently using. And so if you are a team of one or a singular person that's currently managing social media on behalf of a large organization or institution, you need to set realistic expectations. And that, goes back to the things I said earlier, even about mental health. When you are internally not communicating with your leadership the expectations of the community, the expectations for content of yourself, or the needs that you have in order to build robust content, you're sort of, setting yourself up to fail. You very rarely can be in this type of environment if your organization or institution has high expectations for social media engagement on every single platform. And that's okay. You need to pick the one that works for you. You need to think about how to cultivate it strategically. You need to assign the metrics and the data that will go with it. You need to show the results. You need to communicate those internally. And then you need to advocate not only for yourself, but for the growth potentially of your team if it necessitates it, or maybe getting that extra training in the Adobe suite. Canva, I love and adore. I think it's a phenomenal tool. I was delighted to see Jason and Nicole from Social Fresh yesterday launch a entire suite for small businesses or even large institutions who need the additional assist for visual content ideas through Canva. I mean, every single post that goes out for years now has needed some sort of visual. It eats up the feed. It helps draw in the eyeballs. Whether you're placing advertisements, you need templates. If you're creating video content, you could benefit from a template. How you adjust those, obviously, is then where the bonus sort of features come in, right? We don't ever want to use a cookie cutter. We want to make it unique and in our swim lane and really resonate with our stakeholders. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with leveraging a multitude of tools when you are that party of one or that team of one in order to make you the best that you possibly can be, make your content the best that it can be, and then help further and elevate the message of your organization.
What tools do you use personally, if any, from whether it be to help you organize your day, whether it be for the mental health? Because I think the mental health is a real conversation right now. And I say this to my students and to anyone who's listening. We do have to take this time. And it sounds crazy, but we have to take this time to breathe, to do something we enjoy. We cannot, we're in an interesting time, and in a future class, may get a different video when we don't have COVID happening, and maybe it's going to be slightly different. Maybe we won't feel so tied to our computers at home. But right now, if you manage social, you always felt like you were a minute away from having to do something, but it's even more intense now. And that's the reality. So taking time for yourself, really important. I felt that was important to say, but let me get to the point now. The tools. What are the tools for you? It could be something mental health related. It could be organization. I'm just going to throw a shout out to Todoist, who has made my life 10 times easier. What is it for you?
Yeah, actually, I looked down earlier because my watch told me to breathe. So this was one of the new things that my husband got me was, the Apple Watch. I'm a little behind the times. I need less technology in my life, not more. But oddly enough, it's also become sort of my daily shaming tool now because once the semester started again and things got really sort of crazy, I sit in the same chair for 12 hours a day, and then it tells me that I need to actually exercise. So, tools are a blessing and a curse. We're a Google suite here at the University of Michigan, and so I live and die by the Google Docs. I also come out of state government, so give me a one-pager any day of the week. I like things short, sweet, and to the point. But kind of keeping my team all in the same space, leveraging Slack for open communications. Obviously, we have endless hours of Zoom that have occurred over the last 10 months. But from a mental health perspective, we have been really trying to do more no tech. I took a week off Twitter last week, which was very intriguing for me. Anybody that follows me knows that's kind of my bread and butter for both personal, professional, and political commentary, the blending of both my higher ed and my former self worlds. But thinking about the toxicity that we talked about, thinking about the current events, thinking about really refocusing just my efforts and where my time is spent when I'm not connected to a device for work, that was a step that I needed to take. And so I think it's a step that everybody should really be thinking really diligently about right now, whether or not it is, taking time to make a phone call instead of a Zoom call, which surprisingly can be an enormous relief because you don't have to be on, right, in front of someone. Really taking that walk, which, I'm going to be the pot calling the kettle black right now, but all summer long, I tried to do a really good job of getting out an hour a day and taking a lunch, which I never took when we were in the office. Actually, one of my newer staff members was just Googling, right, if we do go back to the office, and said that there's a walking trail less than a mile from our office in a beautiful park. And for 6.5 years, I didn't know it existed. So that tells you a little bit about my work ethic. But one of my very favorite colleagues, who just so happens to be leaving us on Friday, but has been with me for 3 years now, he kind of cracked a lot of jokes at the beginning of quarantine. And it was astonishing to think that we went somehow from working 12-hour days in social media to working 24-hour days, 7 days a week. And it truly did feel like that. And he would give these phenomenal updates on our morning Zoom calls where he would, say, welcome to day 752 of year 3005. And, it's a way to get a chuckle in. I think you have to kind of at least give yourself the freedom of forgiveness and humor sometimes in the current circumstances, and go with the flow, right? There's going to be times where you need to walk away. Right now I have 5 children doing virtual school in my house. Yesterday I had 4 Zoom calls going on in my bedroom from 4 different people, and I had to get up and I had to walk away, and that's okay. It just took a second, and we regroup, and then we come back at it, and hopefully we're a little bit refreshed. I sort of made mental health days before they were actually as important as they are, with my children, important when they were very young. It was a way for me to spend an extra day for them as a working mom. And right now I'm taking them for myself, right? Maybe I just need a drive. I bought a Jeep during quarantine. Maybe I'm making crazy decisions. But it was just a different way for us to, again, disconnect, refocus, and add a little value in our lives when we spend so much time emphasizing adding value in others.
Yeah, and I think one reason we are hitting on this topic is it is important for social media managers and those who touch social strategist managers, whatever your title may be. The titles vary, but very often you're doing a very similar job. And the mental health is important because you are often on call 24/7. If you're a team of one, you definitely are. So it's an important note. It's part of the strategy is taking care of yourself. The other part of strategy I want to make sure we hit on before we get to the end of this is something that you've talked about. You've talked about teammates, communication, because sometimes it's not a social media teammate, but it's someone else at the institution. It's the person who does email. It's the person you're in your organization or your firm who is doing the press releases. How important from a strategic perspective is being on the same page, and whatever ways that you stay on the same page with people who obviously impact us from the side of overall integrated marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's intriguing because my approach to social, I think, has always been maybe a little before its time or a little more unique, and in that it was really about strategic communications and less so about marketing. Our marketing department here at U of M is completely separate. And we obviously communicate, but very little of what we do in social is driven from that lens, and more so from the strategic comms lens. My closest colleague and partner in crime at U of M is our Office of Public Affairs. Our assistant director, our associate director of public affairs, frequently likes to joke she texts me more than her husband. And that's because everything breaks online. We really have to, establish those relationships, establish policies and guidelines around them in order to make ourselves available. We have a joint document that we call our engagement protocol, and it's a beautiful little flow chart that every sort of avenue ends with a big red box that says, call Nikki and Kim at Public Affairs immediately, so that we can help you design the proper response before, heaven forbid, you say something and then, it goes viral and ends up in the news, because anything can be screenshot and taken out of context. And so we want to think really carefully about how we engage with people. We want to help people educate or be educated about whether or not that might be a troll or a bot, or if they are really somebody that you can turn into an advocate. But I truly spent my first year at Michigan on what I would call a listening tour, the equivalent of one, trying to get to know the decision makers across the institution in every school, college, or organizational unit within social communications or social strategy. And that was a way for me to build internal advocates to implement strategy. And I've worked with that group closely. Some of the people on that team now, which I call the social leadership team, some of them have dotted reporting lines into my office. They participate in my weekly team meetings. Others have bi-weekly meetings with me, and yet others have monthly reoccurring meetings with me. So communication could not be more important in communications, but oddly, as many of us know, is sometimes the hardest thing to do. Why communicators don't communicate with each other continuously blows my mind. But I talk way more than I probably should. So I'm constantly texting someone or shooting off an email, sending those reminders to say, hey, speaking back of expectations, if you didn't get me a response and it's not tweetable in about 2 minutes, which used to be 24 hours, people are going to be mad, and that tweet's going to end up somewhere else, or heaven forbid, become a thread of anxiety and angst very quickly, and then get picked up all over the place. I like to joke that our local news outlets here write an article if we jaywalk. Sometimes it's pretty close to the truth, but it depends on the news day.
Yeah, well, I think you make again, as always, a lot of great points. And one of the things that stands out to me whenever I talk to anyone throughout all of this, is communication comes up whether I ask it or it inadvertently just is brought in. And from the side of what you're talking about of knowing the people and meeting the people and taking that listening tour, I would go as far as saying anyone should do that when they take on a job, because it is a tremendous opportunity. I speak to my own experience where I had a wonderful person that I work with, that my communication with that individual, something was off, and I knew it. And I took the time to learn and listen. And then I realized, oh, this is the best way for me to communicate with this person. And I have a great working relationship with them. There never was a bad one, but I knew it could be improved. And all it takes is listening. And I think we're not going to dig into social listening as part of strategy, because I'm going to hopefully have someone else come into the class to talk about social listening. But I will just say, listening is by far one of the most important skills any of us can develop. So if you're in social, please learn to listen. Speaking of listening, I know we've had people jumping in and out. At one point, we had 10 or 11 people in here.
Yeah.
Some of them have gone. It looks like a bunch of them are gone now who might have asked a question. But if there is a question in this last 2 minutes, please go ahead and ask. Happy to bring it to Nikki. That said, Nikki, I will take this time to also say thank you for joining me. I know we could probably talk for a lot longer, but I don't want to make my students watch an hour and a half of something that just turns into and yes, this is the inside joke class, but it would turn into just a bunch of Schitt's Creek. Yes. So that is the reality. This can't date itself because it's only going to get used for a year. So there you go.
There you go.
But that's the other thing. Think about your content and how long it's going to last. But
it's going to last forever. So make sure you're prepared.
Yes, it is going to last forever. And I will end with a question that I have asked, I believe, everyone so far. And if I've missed anyone, that's on me. But what advice would you give to young professionals, be it undergraduates or graduates, who are looking at a profession in marketing with a particular focus on social media? What advice do you give to them in terms of how they can find the most success in their career?
So my answer to this one, I think, is likely slightly different as well. I don't think anyone at this point in time should really wet themselves completely to social media. The tools and the platforms change so quickly that there's almost more value and less stigma associated with more traditional areas or a focus of profession, like marketing and communications. I think strategic marketing, strategic communications, where you also know how to use the suite of tools, of which I know I say too much. Social media is just a tool and not a solution. And that's really just one thing in your arsenal. I think as a young professional, being able to walk into a role and communicate that you have a bigger picture and you can use a variety of mechanisms in order to accomplish that, or that you have really, done your homework in order to be a change agent with whoever you might be interviewing with, and you can implement that change by using a variety of tools, will benefit you much more in the long run than coming in and just kind of saying, I'm a social media person.
Yes, and I love that you said that because one, it's completely true, and the biggest mistake that I think anyone can make is to get stuck in this kind of, I hate to say it, but to be stuck in one role. Because I even say I'm a social media manager. Yes, I am technically I was laughing the other day because my job title is manager, comma, like social media. It's something like that. I'm a manager of social media, but I'm not even. It's bizarre when I actually read it.
Mhm.
But the reality is, I do strategy. I help with
Yeah.
email. I do education. I do trainings. The
Mhm.
titles ultimately involve all these other skill sets, so you have to learn a lot of things. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate your very candid answer. I expected nothing less. Um, and I want to thank you for your time. If you are watching this, you obviously can connect with Nikki on Twitter. I highly recommend it. She is a fantastic, engaging person, and
Thank you.
she will reply to you.
That's
Is
great.
that's one of the nice things. I think Twitter offers a great opportunity, and a few of you in my current class, as I'm recording this, have said you like Twitter a lot. So she would be a great person to connect to. That said, I want to thank everyone who did tune in live as well. And with all that said, I'm just going to say thank you and have
Thank
a
you, Chris.
wonderful, yes, thank you, and have a wonderful day, evening, or whenever you're watching this. Bye bye.
You too.